Sociology is defined by its perspective or point of view, and applying that perspective to gathering knowledge about the social world brings us to sociological investigation. As Chapter 1 explained, in terms of theory, there are several ways to approach sociological investigation. This chapter begins with an explanation of scientific inquiry. But some sociologists, aware of the limitation of just focusing on observable actions and behaviors and measurable or quantitative data, are supporting a more qualitative approach that focuses on interpretation and meaning. And this often involves interviewing people about their experiences and applying scientific methodology to understanding the narrative data they provide. I did this in a recent research project. I interviewed counselors about their experiences with burnout, and I developed a theory of the process of burnout. In addition, some sociologists are aware of the limitations of science in its claim to objectivity, and they are embracing a more critical and activist view of research in their pursuit of social change. In short, scientific sociology, qualitative sociology, and activist or critical sociology all fall within the big tent of research. Many sociologists favor one approach, while others will blend them in various ways, and you'll also see that these approaches roughly correspond to the differences in theoretical orientations. For example, scientific sociology is consistent with the structural function theory. Interpretive sociology shows commonality with symbolic interaction theory, and critical sociology shares a lot with various social, conflict, and feminist theories. Remember the reason that we're studying the social world in the first place. There's a lot to learn, and this knowledge can help us to live richer lives and improve our society. So we have three research orientations: scientific, qualitative, and activist or critical sociology. We also have four methods of doing research. The first is experimental research, which is used a lot in the sciences such as psychology, and it's occasionally used in sociology. We can see it in the classic research of Philip Zimbardo about the effects of prison life on people who live and work there. Often experiments are done to investigate cause and effect under highly controlled conditions. Now, this type of research is explanatory, meaning it doesn't just ask what happens, but why. And experiments are conducted to test hypotheses, and these are usually done in laboratories with experimental and control groups. The next method is survey research. This is where participants respond to a series of statements or questions in a questionnaire or interview. Now, this type of research is usually more descriptive than explanatory. Fieldwork research is another method. This is where researchers will systematically observe people just doing their everyday things, or the researchers may actually join in these activities. Finally, the last method is what I call archival research. This is just using available data that has already been collected by others, such as government agencies. All right, let's look at some of the basics of sociological investigation. The text points out that it begins with two key requirements. Of course, we need to apply our sociological imagination, or the sociological perspective. Secondly, we need to be curious and ask important questions. Remember, as researchers, we are explorers. We're discoverers, and I think that's very exciting. Sociology is indeed a science, which is a logical system that bases knowledge on direct systematic observation. Scientific knowledge is based on empirical evidence or information that we can verify with our senses. The term empiricism comes from the Greek meaning experience, and it's a philosophical view that only the senses can support claims of truth. The closely linked idea of positivism, which we'll talk about, defines truth as positive facts based on sensory experiences. Now, this presentation focuses mostly on positivist sociology, which is the study of society based on systematic observations. It involves concepts, which are just simplified representations of some piece of the world. And usually these are called variables. And the values of these variables change from case to case. And scientists need to come up with some sort of procedure for carefully measuring these variables. But I want you to be aware of the other ways. One of them is interpretive sociology, which was pioneered by Max Weber, who argued that the focus of sociology is interpretation. And interpretive sociology is the study of society focusing on the meanings that people attach to their world. The interpretive sociologist's job is not just to observe what people do, but to share in their world of meaning and come to appreciate why they act the way they do. Critical sociology was founded by Karl Marx, who rejected the idea that society exists as a natural system with a fixed order. It's the study of society that focuses on the need for social change. In other words, the point isn't just to study the world as it is, but to change it. Let's talk a little bit about some important ideas relating to the positivist approach. In order for measurements to be useful, they have to be reliable and valid. Reliability refers to consistency in measurement. For example, if I give the same test to the same person several times, are they going to get the same score or a reasonably similar score? That's very important. Validity is another important idea, and that refers to whether we're measuring actually what we intend to measure. Intelligence tests, for example, are often criticized for the cultural biases that are inherent in the wording of questions, and validity is sometimes questioned. Researchers will operationalize measurements by specifying exactly how they're going to measure a variable and assign a value to it. For example, we may operationalize depression as a score on a depression scale, such as the Beck Depression Inventory. An important thing that research does is shed light on relationships between variables. And one of those relationships is cause and effect. Causality is determined when a change in one variable results in a change in another. And these relationships allow us to predict how one pattern of behavior will produce another. The only way to truly determine a cause and effect relationship is to carefully control for any extraneous or confounding variables. And this is done through an experiment, usually conducted in the laboratory. And this occurs where an independent variable, which is the variable that causes the change, is manipulated by the researcher, and a change in the dependent variable is observed. Now, cause and effect, as I mentioned, allows us some predictive power. We can see how changing the independent variable results in a change in the dependent variable. Another relationship is called correlation, and this is when two or more variables change together. But we have to be careful here. We can't really determine directionality. In other words, we don't know which variable may have led to a change in the other, or vice versa. We need to be careful of what we call spurious correlation. That's an apparent, though false, association between two or more variables, which is actually caused by some other variable. And this has been referred to as the third variable problem. But spurious correlations can be discovered through careful scientific control. Now, I refer you to the text for an excellent example of spurious correlation, but here's a very Simple example, which helped me a lot. I remember this example from an old statistics teacher. Let's imagine that you make an observation. You notice that there are a lot more umbrellas opened whenever there's a lot of water in the storm drain. So in other words, you notice a correlation. There's an increase in open umbrellas when there's an increase of water in the storm drain. Now, can we say that the increase in umbrellas caused the increase in water in the storm drains, or vice versa? No, of course not. That's actually a spurious correlation. There's a third variable. It's raining a lot. So actually, this third variable is causing a change in the other two. Let me point out some rather interesting spurious correlations. One of them is between shoe size and the ability to solve math problems. There's a positive correlation between the two. As shoe size increases, mathematical ability increases. But it's important to point out that the sample came from a population of school-aged students, and it's also important to point out that children's feet tend to grow as they go through school. Another one is the strong positive correlation between places of worship in an area and the number of bars in the same vicinity. Now, the explanation may seem obvious to some. Religion simply drives people to drink. But of course, that's a false conclusion. The spurious nature of correlations may not be immediately clear, so it's going to require some additional information, and you may need to more carefully interpret the data to really understand the real nature of the connection between variables. And this leads us to the important fact that scientists need to strive for objectivity, which is personal neutrality in conducting research. Now, one way to limit distortion caused by personal values or jumping to conclusions is through replication. That is, repetition of research by others. Replicating results means testing the conclusions and seeing if other researchers come to the same conclusions and have the same results. Replication helps to improve the validity of conclusions. It should come as no surprise that ethical principles are important in research. These guidelines promote truth and honesty in conducting research and publishing the results. Because sociologists work with people, they must protect the participants' welfare. Research subjects have the right to know the purpose of the research, what they'll be expected to do, and they have the right to refuse to participate or leave the study at any time without penalty. Subjects have the right to know the benefits and the potential risks of participating. Sociologists must be aware that research can harm as well as help people and communities. The American Sociological Association has formal guidelines for conducting research, and there are also federal guidelines. Research involving human participants requires Institutional Review Board review. Just a quick review of the various research methods that are available. Now, researchers will select a method that will best answer their research question. The first one is an experiment. That's usually conducted in a laboratory, and that's where the researchers manipulate an independent variable and look for changes in the dependent variable. A survey may be given. This can involve a questionnaire or an interview. Participant observation involves going out into the field, and researchers observe subjects in their naturalistic settings. And the final method is using available data. That's information that already exists. Researchers use two general types of reasoning. One is inductive logical thought, and the other is deductive logical thought. Inductive reasoning builds specific observations into general theory. It goes from the specific pieces of data and pulls them together into a general theory or explanation that ties the observations together. Deductive reasoning transforms these broader general ideas into specific hypotheses that can be tested scientifically. Here's a diagram from your text which clearly demonstrates the cyclical nature of research. Again, remember that inductive reasoning takes specific observations and makes generalizations and comes up with a theory to explain these observations. Deductive reasoning goes in the other direction. It takes the theory and creates a hypothesis based on that theory and gathers data to either prove or disprove that hypothesis. It's important to point out that there are limitations to scientific sociology. One of them is human behavior is simply too complex to precisely predict any individual's actions. Another is because people respond to their surroundings, the mere presence of a researcher can affect the behavior being studied. That's referred to as the Hawthorne effect. Another effect is social desirability bias. That's where people respond to survey questions in ways that make them look good to the researcher. Another limitation is social patterns may vary. What's true at one time or place may not hold true in another. I recall there was a real anti-military sentiment in this country during the Vietnam era, and that certainly isn't true today. And because sociologists are part of the social world that they study, being absolutely value-free is difficult. I'm going to conclude this presentation with a list of the 10 steps in sociological investigation from the text. The author points out that the 10 steps are all important, but they don't necessarily need to follow the order you see here. I'll leave it to you to study more closely these steps. Before I conclude, I do want you to understand that sometimes people will mislead with statistics because people select their data, they choose what variables to show you, and they also interpret their data. And sometimes, as pointed out in the text, people will use statistics and graphs to spin the truth. It's by understanding research methods and statistics that you can more carefully evaluate the conclusions of published research.